All right. Hey, folks, think we're ready to get started. This is Joe Invic from RETEC Advisors here, and it's great to be with everybody. We have got a packed webinar for you today, both in terms of content and in terms of folks attending. We've got over 100 registrants for this webinar, so really excited to see so much interest in Propertyfit. And before we get started, I want to kick it over to Kimberly Brannon, who's the Executive Director of Prosper Portland, to kind of tee us up, and then we'll go from there. So Kimberly, over to you.
Hello, thanks so much, Joe. I'm Kimberly Branham, Executive Director at Prosper Portland, and I want to welcome each of you to Expanding Portland's CPACE Market webinar. Really appreciate our co-sponsors, which is the Oregon chapters of American Institute of Architects, Building Owners and Managers Association, the National Association of Industrial and Office Properties, and the Urban Land Institute Northwest. Appreciate them for helping us to reach out and invite their members to join the conversation and for our longstanding partnership with each organization. I'm really heartened by each of your participation this morning. With the public health pandemic, related economic uncertainty, climate change, and the racial justice movement requiring our collective attention, there are a number of places to focus your time. So this morning we'll share information about the exciting new Propertyfit CPACE financing program, which is available through Multnomah County, and we believe is actually very relevant and responsive in this moment. Prosper Portland has spent the last 4 years developing and refining the program in partnership with Multnomah County and the Energy Trust of Oregon, and we thank each of those organizations and their teams for their ongoing collaboration. What you're going to hear today is that CPACE is a new financing structure that enables commercial, industrial, and multifamily property owners to obtain long-term, fixed-rate, fully amortized financing to deliver energy efficiency, water conservation, renewable energy, and seismic resiliency improvements to their properties. Prosper Portland helped to create this program because it helps to achieve our shared climate action and our resiliency goals, and it has the added benefit of fostering economic opportunities and creating jobs through the physical improvements that it supports. I'd like to thank each of our panelists, panel of experts, for taking the time to share their experience with the program and how it's provided benefits to the projects that they'll describe. So I'll introduce each of them and then turn it back over to Joe. So Nick Freetel, who's CFO with Sturgeon Development Partners, Carly Harrison, Development Manager with Gerding Edlen, Robert Countryman, Regional President with First Interstate Bank, Rafi Goldberstein, President with the CPACE Loan Group, and finally my colleague Shelly Hack, who's been behind the scenes and really moving forward this program. She's the Propertyfit Program Administrator within Prosper Portland. So I'll turn it over to Joe and just appreciate everyone for being here. Thanks again.
Very good. Thank you, Kimberly. And if we can go to the next slide here, Holt. So to reiterate, this webinar is going to cover how Propertyfit financing can unlock opportunities to improve water, energy, and resilience performance in your properties. We're going to be focused today on how Propertyfit can support new construction and major renovation projects, but of course it can also support existing building projects, which you'll hear come up in a couple of cases. And in terms of an agenda, I'll do a brief intro to the program and how it uses the CPACE financing model. In case you're wondering who I am and who RETEC are, we work with Shelly Hack to run the Propertyfit program. And then Rafi is going to dive into the broader trend towards PACE financing and why it's sort of taking off across much of the US economy and why PACE is powerful. Then we're going to hear the lender's perspective from Robert on how PACE can effectively slot into the capital stack for new construction and major renovation, in some cases lowering the overall cost of capital on projects. And then we'll hear about 2 projects that have successfully used Propertyfit financing, which I'm really excited for. So Nick's going to talk about a major adaptive reuse project that transformed an industrial building into a Class A office and retail space while also improving its seismic resiliency. And then Carly is going to present on their very exciting project that will actually become Portland's first certified living building and is currently designed to be the largest commercial living building project in the world, which is very interesting to hear about. So I'm really excited for these perspectives and particularly learning how Propertyfit helped make those projects happen. And then we also have Shelly, who we've mentioned a couple of times on the line. She runs the Propertyfit program and is the real brains behind the operation here. So she'll be available to answer any questions you might have, although she won't be speaking. So we're going to talk for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have a bunch of time for Q&A at the end. We may take some questions between the speakers, depending on how much time we have. One thing to note is to please enter your questions in the chat box in the webinar screen at any time when you have the question. If your question's for a specific speaker, please note that person in your question, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. We're also going to be recording the webinar and sending it out afterwards, and we'd be happy to send you the deck as well if you need that. So if you're like me and you like to capture all the information, no need to type furiously. You'll have this all at the end. I apologize, I forgot Trisha. She wasn't on our agenda slide here, but she's also going to speak to the Energy Trust of Oregon's new buildings program as well. So sorry, Trisha. Okay, so on to the next slide. At a high level, just to summarize for those of you who may be new to Propertyfit, Propertyfit provides strategic long-term financing for energy efficiency, renewable energy, seismic, and water conservation projects in Multnomah County. Going on to the next slide. So Propertyfit is a partnership between Prosper Portland, Multnomah County, and the Energy Trust of Oregon to finance building improvement projects. It's based on the Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy, or CPACE, financing mechanism that is growing rapidly across the country, as you're going to hear from Rafi. And CPACE has many benefits to both the building owner and to capital providers, which we're going to get into momentarily. And the thing about CPACE financing is that it's secured by a special assessment, a lien against the property, which is a model that's been used in public infrastructure projects for a long time, but is now being used in the private market to finance energy, water, and seismic retrofits. And in terms of some kind of high-level data, CPACE has now supported more than 2,400 projects, totaling more than $1.5 billion, and even more than that on the residential side as well. So it's growing quite quickly. And in Oregon, CPACE is currently available through the Propertyfit program in Multnomah County only. So going on to the next slide, a little bit more about how Propertyfit works in practice. So the process here is very similar to a traditional loan process, but with a few adjustments. So Propertyfit serves as the program administrator and helps coordinate all aspects of the process from application to closing the financing. The building owner then works directly with, or the developer works directly with Propertyfit's enrolled capital providers who fund the project. And the building owner then repays the capital provider over time as they would under any traditional loan. But instead of a mortgage, it's a special assessment lien that's placed on the property to secure the financing. So the assessment lien structure provides benefits, like I said, to both the property owner and to the capital provider, which we're going to discuss. The building owner then works with contractors to actually execute the installation or the development of the project. And then the Energy Trust of Oregon is available to provide support in the form of things like energy audits, vendor selection, design assistance, and incentives to improve the economics of the project overall. So we generally highly encourage that you speak to ETO early and often in the process to take advantage of their resources. And we're going to hear more from Trisha in just a moment about ETO. So on to the next slide. What are the benefits of Propertyfit financing? Well, this is a new financing tool that was specifically designed to overcome many of the challenges that traditional financing for commercial buildings has faced. So first, Propertyfit is specifically designed to support energy and water conservation and seismic projects that are projects that, as I think many of you know, are often overlooked in existing buildings or can be value engineered out of new construction. So it's a dedicated financing source specifically for those uses. And second is it's accessible. Owners can finance up to 100% of the new, the eligible measures of the eligible measures without paying any out-of-pocket cost, and there's no personal guarantee required. And I should also note that someone from the Propertyfit team, a Propertyfit advisor, is always available to assist and kind of help you manage through the financing process. Third, it's competitive. So unlike traditional mortgage financing, which might be adjustable rate with, say, a 5 to 10 year balloon payment down the line, Propertyfit is competitively priced, fixed rate, fully amortized financing that can go for 30 years or longer, depending on the lifespan of the equipment in question. And the financing cannot accelerate in the event of default. And I should note for new construction and major renovation projects, Propertyfit can in many cases replace higher cost mezzanine debt or equity financing, which can lower the overall cost of capital on the transaction, which Rafi's gonna touch on, as well as Robert. Propertyfit is also fully transferable. So because it's tied to the underlying real asset, the financing automatically transfers upon sale to new owners, which can help improve asset liquidity. And then finally, Propertyfit is often seen as a good strategic investment. So a lot of times the cost savings from the energy or water retrofits done can actually exceed the payments required on the financing, making them cash flow positive from day one. Improvements, I think, to the safety and performance of the building obviously increase market appeal and are very important, particularly when it comes to things like indoor air quality in this day and age. And Propertyfit can also be a great way to tackle your overall ESG goals, providing a dedicated strategic source of financing that can help you achieve ESG at scale and speed. And I also want to point out that in the era of COVID, Propertyfit can be a great way to support building performance improvements now more than ever. One reason is because Propertyfit can support indoor air quality improvements or other health and safety improvements like ventilation and building control systems, but also because a lot of projects are struggling right now, and many developers are finding PACE to be a good new alternative source of financing that perhaps they haven't considered in the past. So if you have a project that you think might be a good fit for Propertyfit, but you're not quite sure, I'd encourage you to reach out to us, and we're always happy to talk it through and see if there's a way we can make it work. Going on to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about which types of projects and properties are eligible for Propertyfit. So Propertyfit is, excuse me, is available for both existing buildings and new construction and major renovation, as I was saying. So property types that qualify include commercial, industrial, multifamily buildings with 5 or more units, basically all the property types you see here, as well as some additional ones. And I also should point out that look-back financing is available for projects that have been completed in the last 24 months, which many markets are finding is proving to be a useful tool to help them kind of navigate COVID. Moving on to the next slide. There's a wide range of eligible projects for Propertyfit, many of which are listed here, although this isn't an exhaustive list. So pretty much any measure that's going to reduce energy consumption or water consumption, generate clean energy, improve seismic resilience, or do other things related to energy and water usage is typically going to qualify. You can see some eligible improvements here, which range from energy and water efficiency to renewable energy to battery storage, electric vehicle charging, and earthquake-related upgrades. And in fact, many Propertyfit projects will consist of multiple upgrades bundled together into the same project, so that's very common. And I do want to point out that for new construction and major renovation projects, there's an alternative eligibility pathway where if the building as a whole is expected to perform 5% or better above code in terms of energy intensity per square foot, then you can finance up to 20% of the total construction costs that way as well. One final slide here is I want to talk a little bit about the process for securing Propertyfit financing. So we follow a pretty traditional lending process with the added component of an energy performance evaluation. So a Propertyfit advisor like myself or Holt or Shelley will walk you through each step of this process. And like I said before, we highly encourage you to get in touch with us early and often so we can help you make sure your project is eligible, make sure you don't waste your time, help you put together a good application, and just generally answer any questions. And we'll have our contact information at the end if you want to get in touch about this, or you can just go to the Google Propertyfit, go to the website, and you can get in touch with us that way as well. And then in addition, I should note that the Energy Trust of Oregon and its network of trade allies is available to assist with energy audits and project scoping and a variety of other services we're going to hear about from Tricia. And then we at Propertyfit also have an enrolled network of contractors that we'd be happy to put you in touch with as well if you're having a hard time finding vendors for the work. And then when it comes time to match you with a capital provider, we have 8 enrolled providers who are ready to fund your project, including one we have with us on the line today in the form of PLG and Rafi. And they will then provide you with term sheets, and then we'll work with you to select the best offer for your project. So it's pretty simple process overall. So speaking of the Energy Trust of Oregon, I want to kick it over to Tricia to speak to how they can help projects with high performance new construction, including some early design and technical assistance. So Tricia, please take it away.
Great. Hi. Thank you, Joe. I'm Tricia Paul with Energy Trust of Oregon. I represent the new buildings team that also manages major renovations. So we're an independent nonprofit bringing cash incentives to a project for energy efficient equipment. We engage projects early, and as you follow the slide from blue down to red, we want to engage during schematic or early schematic. One of the things we're most proud of is our net zero or path to net zero program, which says we're going to walk you through an early design assistance meeting, collaborate early on equipment, specified equipment, and then through solar. So solar, if not solar ready then, and guide down through net zero, right? A net zero building meaning generate all the energy on the roof through renewables that it uses. Through our program, we bring cash along the way. So for that early design assistance, energy charrette, and technical assistance. I think it's important for each building to take a whole building approach and look at all the systems and measures as they integrate. We want to pay for 50 or 60% of the cost of that study. So studying all the equipment that's on the list, determining how much energy it saves, and then helping support that financially. Our program talks in kilowatt hours and therms. So if you were to build a code building, which here we're trying to exceed that by 5%, that we are going to pay for equipment that exceeds code. Our program also pays for measure and verification, and then post-occupancy certifications. Now, I'll be around for questions later, as well as my colleague Victoria. She's on the line. She manages a lot of office renovations and office build-outs. I specialize more in the multifamily residential, senior assisted living, or hotels. Thank you, Joe.
Unmute myself there. Thank you very much. Just one final note before I throw it over to Rafi here. So these are our 8 enrolled capital providers in the program. And these represent a diverse group of folks who have played a major role in rolling out PACE nationwide. That being said, if you have an alternative capital provider you'd like to partner with on a deal, we can support that as well, as long as they're willing to go through the process of enrolling with Propertyfit. And I want to turn it over to Rafi now to talk through the trends in the PACE market and some of the value propositions behind PACE. So Rafi, go for it.
Great. Thank you, Joe, and thanks very much to Propertyfit Portland and Propertyfit for putting this webinar on, and all of the co-panelists and co-sponsors. So just a very quick introduction. My name is Rafi Goldberstein. I'm the CEO of PACE Loan Group, or PLG, as I'll refer to it during this webinar. We are a Minneapolis-based CPACE lender. We are direct lenders, so we are the actual source of capital for these deals, and we work nationwide, although specifically we have been the most active lender in Oregon, and I think that's where we've been the only lender in Oregon on all of the PACE projects to date. So this is a program that we are very comfortable with, and Shelley and Joe and their respective teams have really put together a great opportunity here for property owners and developers. I know we have folks on the line that are not just in Oregon, and so I'll kind of cater this slightly to a broader audience as well. But certainly feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we can embark. So next slide, please. So Joe touched on this a little bit, but I'll go over it briefly here. So PACE, again, property assessed clean energy, and it's a financing tool that's used to fund energy efficient improvements, which can be things like run-of-the-mill CapEx, honestly, like HVACs, chillers, roof, windows, lights, all that sort of stuff that's in your building anyway that you have to maintain and fix. Or it can be renewable, such as solar, or in Oregon and all along the West Coast, actually, it can be seismic retrofits, which is a massive market for anyone on the West Coast. PACE is intended to cover up to 100% of the cost for those eligible improvements. And as Joe said, and it depends on the state that we're in, PACE loans can be up to 30 years in term, although the market generally is closer to 20 or 25 years. PACE is a state-by-state program. So what you can do in Oregon will differ from what you can do in Washington, which just came online a couple months ago, to what you can do in Florida. So we'll talk in general terms here, but just keep in mind that every state does have its own kind of wacky nuances, although the theme is consistent across the country. And as Joe said, again, PACE is secured by a special assessment name. So it's not secured by a mortgage. It's not secured by a UCC in the way that a mezzanine loan will. It's secured by a tax lien. And we'll get into why that's really interesting and important for property owners on the next slide, or in a couple of slides. Next slide, please. So let's look at the capital stack. And I should say, my background, I've been a lender for 15 years. So PACE Loan Group's approach to PACE is very just kind of blocking and tackling, real estate centric approach. And we try to be very pragmatic and really look at PACE through the eyes of a lender, because that's what we are, right? We're just writing a real estate loan here. So from a developer standpoint, how does PACE work? Well, the traditional way of financing a property would be with a mortgage, say 65% loan to value, loan to cost, and then 35% equity, preferred equity, mezzanine loan, something other than the mortgage loan. Now enter PACE. PACE can come in and it can effectively reduce your equity requirement, which will then in turn increase IRRs on the project. Now, the goal here is not to replace mortgage debt, because mortgage debt will, in almost every instance, be your cheapest cost of capital, unless you're going to a high yield debt fund or something like that. So you want to keep your mortgage level the same. So in this case, 65%. But you want to slide PACE into the cap stack, say anywhere from 15 to 25% of the project cost. And you can see the result is basically you reduce the equity, or you even eliminate preferred equity or mezzanine debt. And that's the way that you successfully piece together a PACE capital stack. And it does become a bit of a dance on every single deal, but that's the general idea. So next slide, please. To give you a sense of how we've deployed PACE across the country for PLG, here's sort of 9 examples. The top 3 are all the Oregon deals that have been closed to date. And again, we've funded all of those deals. We've had very excellent local partners, not only with Shelley and Joe and their teams, but also through the mortgage brokerage community. Casey Davidson at JLL was responsible for the Premier Gear deal, which Nick will talk about, and John Wiest over at Northwest Commercial Mortgage was doing PAE, which Carly will talk about, both really interesting examples of how to utilize PACE. The third deal we did was the Kex Social House. It's effectively a high-end hostel with a large F&B operation. And that was it is a historic property in Northeast Portland, right at MLK and Burnside. And we utilized PACE in 2 components there. There was a seismic retrofit component, and there was also an energy efficiency component. And so we kind of took both of what Multnomah County has to offer and put them together to create a PACE loan on that asset. And as you can imagine, a hostel is traditionally a very hard asset to finance with conventional mortgage lenders. And so PACE was able to come into that deal, provide a very large piece of the capital stack where more traditional debt was not available. Other assets in the portfolio, an adaptive reuse Omaha, Nebraska, again, hospitality. This was built in the early 1900s as a hotel, was used as a corporate headquarters for about 20 or 30 years as an office building, went vacant, and is now being reconverted into its original use as a hotel that is slated to open up in the next 60 days. Praha Village, this was Minnesota's first ever ground up construction project, right? So we utilized PACE here in addition to TIF and mortgage debt to actually construct a senior living facility. Treasure Island Center in downtown St. Paul was an interesting example of PACE. This was a former Macy's store, a Macy's box that had been shuttered and was vacant for about 2 or 3 years. The city of St. Paul had issued an RFP for redevelopment, and this deal got transformed into a true mixed-use facility with office, retail, bars and restaurants, and the developer even put on the roof of the building the practice facility for the Minnesota Wild, which is Minnesota's NHL franchise. And we did about a $7 million PACE loan on that, in addition to, again, TIF, mortgage debt, and a whole slew of state grants to make that capital stack work. The bottom left, Strong Scott, this is a creative office slash warehouse deal in the Twin Cities. We just simply used PACE to pay for a new roof. Right? It was as simple as that. They had no existing mortgage. We used PACE for the roof, and it worked out quite well. Central Apartments, this was a former exterior corridor motel in Austin, converted to workforce housing, so studio apartments. Again, PACE went in to pay for all the MEP, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and supplement the capital stack. And then IMS, this is a design center in Minneapolis, and there's about 140 tenants. We wrote about a $4 million PACE loan here to pay for a whole bunch of deferred maintenance. Again, all the MEP stuff, lights, windows, all that. But what was really interesting about this project, and a really good way to show how PACE works, is because PACE is a tax, right? We talked about this in the beginning. Most leases that are net leases or even modified gross leases provide that a landlord can pass through real estate taxes to their tenants. And real estate taxes are generally defined to include special assessments. And so you actually have the opportunity to pass through your PACE payments, your PACE debt service payments, to your tenants as a CAM charge. And on this deal in Minneapolis, 140 tenants, they are all basically paying their pro rata share of the PACE assessments. So from a developer standpoint, it was a phenomenal use of PACE. They got $4 million of capital, cheaper than equity, and their tenants are paying the debt service. So that hopefully gives you a sense of the many ways that you can use PACE in a traditional real estate deal. Next slide, please. So for developers, right, why do you want to do this, and why are people suddenly realizing this is a great way to finance your project? Well, the first and the most important reason for many folks is that it will increase your returns. Right? PACE is there to replace or reduce equity or mezz or pref equity. And so if we go back to that sort of more traditional cap stack example, you can see your cost of equity or your cost of mezz is going to be somewhere in the double digits. PACE is going to be in the single digits. And so you can easily increase your project yield by a couple hundred basis points, if not more, by basically just swapping out the expensive debt and inputting PACE in instead. Not only that, it's very patient, long-term money, right? A traditional mezz loan, for example, will be coterminous with the senior loan, which may be 3 or 5 years. A PACE loan is anywhere from 20 to 30 years, fixed rate, non-recourse. And the only way you can really default under a PACE loan is by not paying your taxes. So it's not anywhere nearly as scary as a mezz loan where a foreclosure can take place like that. PACE is very passive. And so it's a very borrower-friendly instrument. As we said, it can be a pass-through expense under CAM charges. It can actually make your property cash flow positive, right? If you're using PACE to do a bunch of energy efficiency improvements, your taxes will go up because of the assessment, but your utility and R&M bill will be going down. So you will be likely be net neutral or potentially even cash flow positive. And then of course you have the added benefits of just promoting energy efficiency and renewable energies, which certainly in the Oregon program is front and center. And we'll talk about that with Carly as well, about how you can really use it on very energy efficient properties. Next slide, please.
Just wanted to give you a 1-minute warning, Rafi.
Okay, so I said at the beginning, we work nationwide. The states in blue here, well, the states that you see on the map that are highlighted are where PACE is currently eligible. The states in blue have retroactive PACE financing, which means that you can actually, and Joe, you said this, you can qualify for PACE on projects that you did 1, 2, or 3 years ago, depending on the program. Excellent way to infuse capital into a project. It works as a cash out, and we can cover that in Q&As if there are people that want to go into a bit more detail. Next slide, please. So very high level, and I'm happy to answer questions offline as well. Programmatically, our loans are $250,000 to $20 million. It's a massive spectrum that we'll lend on. We'll do all major food groups, office, multifamily, retail, hotel. We closed on a self-storage deal just last week. Generally 20 to 25-year deals. The interest rates will depend on loan size and on state because there's a whole bunch of nuances. But assume 5.5 to 6.5. Generally be a 1-point origination fee that we charge, although when we're doing $250,000 deals, we're going to charge you a little more than a point because it just doesn't make any sense. There is no lockout on our PACE loans, right? We're writing a 25-year fixed rate loan that you can technically pay off tomorrow. Highly unusual for this sort of fixed rate debt instrument. And again, they're non-recourse, subject to a completion guarantee, which will burn off for new construction, which will burn off when the property has C of O. So I think my time is probably up. But again, happy to answer any questions at the end. And you can visit the website, paceportland.com, and get a hold of us that way, or paceloangroup.com. They both go to the same spot.
Beautiful. Thanks, Rafi. Just one quick question that I saw for you here is, have you seen CPACE work on new construction next to HUD loans? How does that interact?
Yes. So the short answer is yes, you can do it. The long answer is it's complicated, and you need to make sure you have enough lead time. And it will definitely depend on the HUD program that you're doing, whether it's 221D or something else. But it is possible, but it's HUD, so it's a process.
Sounds good. Thank you. And remember to keep asking questions in the chat box as we go through, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. My name is Robert Countryman. I'm the market president for First Interstate Bank here in Portland, as well as covering Seattle. We were introduced to the PACE loan program actually with the Premier Gear project, and I'm really proud to say that we've been able to kind of work with Rafi's group on a couple of the Premier projects here in Portland. which you heard a little bit about. Nick, I think Nick's going to talk about the Premier Gear project, and then Carly's going to talk about the PAE living building. I was going to give a shout out to Gil Alvarez. Gil, I think he's on this call as our he manages my commercial real estate construction group, and actually has been actively involved with both of the projects as well. You know, I'm going to give a little bit of overview of kind of the benefits of PACE lending from a lender's perspective, and then also talk about some of the considerations, you know, from a lender's standpoint, how they might impact, you know, loan structure and things like that. First of all, I'm really proud to say that we've been able to kind of use PACE to partner up with two premier developers here in Portland, Sturgeon Development Group. So we've been able to kind of work with Vanessa and Nick over at Sturgeon Development on the Premier Gear project, was our first project that we used PACE on. And then also more recently working with Gerding Edlen. So what a great developer, you know, here in Portland, but has been able to kind of focus on this great project, which is going to get, you know, international coverage really when it's complete. And so we're real proud to work with Roger and Jill and Carly and their team at Gerding Edlen, as well as the folks at PAE. Couple things, the benefits of PACE financing. I think Rafi's talked about a few of those. Couple things, I think, you know, in this new environment, we're finding, you know, typically on a larger loan, you know, historically we may have been able to bring a participant in. The reality is a lot of banks are on the sideline on the construction side now with, you know, kind of the COVID environment and economic downturn. A lot of banks are remaining very, very conservative. So PACE actually jumps up as an alternative for a bank like First Interstate. If we're doing a very sizable loan and we need to have a participant, you know, we can work with like a Rafi's group or another lender on the PACE side to kind of cover that position. The bank's direct loan to value obviously is going to be a little bit lower, which is attractive when we're trying to get through kind of the credit approval process. It also allows us to kind of lower a hold position on some of the larger projects. Great part about it, and Rafi had mentioned this too, PACE financing is long-term, it's flexible. We can structure around a construction loan as well as a permanent piece. And it stays with it can stay with the property, which is great if the property sells or is refinanced, it can actually continue on past the bank's loan, and it cannot be accelerated. So typically it lowers the overall cost of capital, especially compared to mezzanine debt or preferred debt or equity. And the other thing it does is reduces the refinance risk. A lot of times if you have a mezzanine lender in, they want to be taken out, you know, at the end of construction. And in this whole new environment, new world, you know, who knows, lease up may take longer. So that gives a little bit of comfort level for the long term, both from the bank side as well as the sponsor side or the borrower side. A great part too is it typically reduces the overall cost and hopefully improves cash flow through energy efficiency. And the great part about the two projects we've worked on, one was adaptive reuse, which is a niche that First Interstate has focused on, and the Gerding Edlen project is a ground-up construction. So we've got experience kind of on both of those pieces. A lot of banks, including First Interstate, are really focused on sustainability and targets and goals on trying to work with the community on those type of goals. And certainly when we work with projects like we're working with Energy Trust on some of these projects, definitely helps our hit our goals overall. So that's a great benefit too, above and beyond just kind of the financing piece. A couple lender, next slide. Couple lender considerations with PACE, especially from a bank standpoint, trying to figure out how you go about structuring. One thing to keep in mind, we do need to cover the combined debt service coverage. So the interest coverage that we need to have for the PACE loan has to be covered on as well as the bank debt. So combined debt service is important. One big consideration is the HVCRE. So it's this is a regulatory requirement that the bank has, which came into place a couple of years ago. HVCRE is really high volatility commercial real estate. Primarily, it's construction loans. So from a regulatory standpoint, we have to make sure there's 15% cash equity coming into a project. I'd like to say PACE is considered cash equity, but technically it's not. So we've got to make sure we cover, truly cover the 15% cash equity piece. Collateral lien position, as Rafi had mentioned, it actually is technically is an assessment similar to taxes, and it is a tax. So we're actually able to be in I'd call it a pari passu position on the PACE loan, which is a comfortable position to be as opposed to being in a secondary position. So that's a good benefit of the PACE loan. One thing to consider, I will say on the collateral lien position, though, it's a little complex. I think from a bank standpoint, as we try to educate other folks on the program, I certainly had conversations with other bankers as well to make sure they're comfortable with that collateral lien position. Construction draw process and project budget. You got to make sure you have a good partner on the PACE side. Rafi's group, and I'll give a shout out to his group, has really educated our group on the process. When we think about each draw that comes from construction draw, essentially it may have components of the PACE loan in it, because essentially we're qualifying all of the project we're qualifying all of the energy efficiency or seismic pieces ahead of time, and we just need to make sure when we have the draw process or draw request that comes through, we allocate the appropriate amount to use the PACE loan. So that can add some complexity to the construction draw process. That's why I think it's really important to understand, who your partner is, in working with folks like Nick and Carly, having everybody together on the front end. I think from a lender's side, making sure when you kick the project off, everybody understands how that process is going to work. Last, I will say, there's some additional legal costs and complexity to it. So certainly, my comment there is you got to make sure it's a big enough project to cover a lot of that. So, and Rafi, I know across the country, you've had various size of loans, but typically I would say from a PACE standpoint for a bigger construction loan, probably $1.5 million to $2 million is kind of the low end of what PACE money might come into a project. So I just say that from a complexity standpoint, you'll need additional attorneys involved to kind of cover that piece. But again, when you look at the overall benefits, especially compared to mezzanine financing or any kind of preferred equity, you can kind of cover that given the size of the loan. So with that, I think I will wrap up, and I appreciate everybody joining us today. If you have questions on the bank side, certainly feel free to give me a call, or Gil Alvarez on my team as well. Thanks, Joe.
Perfect. Thank you, Robert. Don't see any questions for you yet, but if you got any questions for Robert, please send those in the chat and we'll get to those in the Q&A at the end. And now we're going to get into the case study, which I'm excited for. So first up is Nick, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So I'm Nick Friddle with Sturgeon Development Partners, local development group here in Portland. So the project we're going to talk about is Premier Gear. We've got a little aerial here to show kind of downtown Portland. The building is located, right on the border of kind of the Pearl District and Slabtown, full city block. We acquired this building back in the summer of 2017, and the original use was a gear repair shop, constructed in phases between 1926 and 1970. The seller, it was an owner user asset, and they had built a new facility in Canby, and so they were relocating kind of out of the city. So we were able to acquire the asset from them, do a little bit of a sale lease back for them while they finished construction on their new location. But then that gave us time to pursue a rezoning of the property. So it had been zoned industrial. With the 2035 comp plan, the land use designation for that area changed to commercial mixed use. So we're able to go in and get the property rezoned to commercial mixed use. And then also kind of work on our drawings for the project. Our business plan was really to go in there, gut it out, add some mezzanine and increase the leasable square footage. So we're at about 68,000 square feet. And so, as I said, we acquired the property summer of 2017. We started looking at recapitalizing for the redevelopment in kind of late Q3 of 2018. So just over 12 months after we purchased the property. We had a couple of false starts looking at PACE financing. It was such a new product at the time. We ended up working with 2 or 3 different groups that were still trying to get their arms around the different legal components within Multnomah County. And then eventually we're introduced to Rafi, who was able to get us across the goal line. And we closed that financing in 2019, in April of 2019. I think we were the second PACE loan to close in Oregon, and I think the first PACE loan to close with a senior construction loan in place on the property. So it was a little bit of a learning curve, but in general, it was stressful at the time. Looking back on it, it was a great result. We were happy with the financing. I've got a couple of photos to run through, and then I can kind of go through some of the economics as to how we made the decision. So these are some of the interior renderings on the left, kind of photos on the right, matching up the angles of the renderings. We're just wrapping up the project right now. Got slightly delayed due to COVID, but overall, I don't think that badly delayed. You can go to the next slide. So again, some interior shots of the finished product as it stands now, and then kind of the original renderings that were envisioned. You can go to the next slide. So our $3 million PACE loan was secured by seismic upgrades. So we added the mezzanine in there, and obviously had to do some pretty significant seismic upgrades due to the age and construction of the building. So you can see the bracings, the cross bracings that are in there, and the various spots within the building. That was the primary source of securing the PACE financing. You can go to the next slide. And so then why PACE financing worked for us. So we bought the building in 2017. We went through the whole process of rezoning the building, which really kind of increased the value of the site, going from industrial to commercial. And so I think, one of the things that PACE financing helped us do is kind of realize that value add from the rezoning. We also, as Robert had described, we were able to secure this financing, but still maintain a debt service coverage of above a 1.20 and underwritten debt service coverage, obviously, of above a 1.20. And so we felt comfortable with the cash flow that with this leverage, we're still going to be able to hit our cash flow needs. As Rafi described, it did increase our IRR to 400 or 500 basis points based on a 10-year hold. So that was obviously a big driver. But really the biggest decision for us was the marginal cost of capital. So we did have other options on financing. We had an option of getting a higher leveraged loan from a private equity fund, which would have gotten us pretty close to where our overall debt load was with this structure. But looking at the cost of capital for the traditional senior loan, and then where we would have been with the private equity loan, that marginal cost of capital was north of 25% just for that little extra piece. So we're able to take that out and replace it with PACE financing, and really lower our average cost of capital, which helped us a lot. And then from a risk standpoint, the fact that it's a long-term financing that stays with the property. So when we eventually end up needing to go to refinance the construction loan or convert it into a perm, there was no risk of having to refinance that PACE component of it. So our leverage that we're trying to refinance out of was actually more reasonable than what it looks like when you combine the PACE and the senior financing on there. So the long-term nature of it really helped us get comfortable with that. And then I guess I would just add from a process standpoint, once we closed the loan and got everything completed, from a developer standpoint, it was really pretty seamless for us. Prior to closing it, we identified the lines within the schedule of value that the general contractor put together for their budget, and identified which line items were going to be kind of contributing to the seismic upgrade costs. And then as we submitted our pay apps, we just identified those pieces to the bank, and Robert and his team were able to just send us the funds in one wire, and we weren't, we sent the draw to Rafi to approve as well, but it was a very seamless process where we just had to send in one draw request. We received the funds one time, and it worked out, very well for us. Also, I would add, on the refinance side, we did bake in 2 years of interest reserve for the PACE component, so it gives us a lot of runway to lease up the building before we're really having to come out of pocket to pay that debt service on the PACE piece. So everything worked out really well for us, and we were very pleased with the execution and the transaction.
Very good. Thanks, Nick. Shows you how much of a finance nerd we all are. When you say mezzanine, the first thing I assume is mezzanine financing. It took me a couple of times to realize you were talking about a literal
Yeah.
mezzanine.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. So no questions for you yet, but if you have any questions for Nick, please go ahead and send those in the chat. And last but certainly not least, I'm going to turn it over to Carly to talk about the PAE living building.
Great, thank you. Can everyone hear me? I'm Carly Harrison, Development Manager with Gerding Edlen, a development company here in Portland. And we'll actually, just as a footnote, be changing the name to Edlen and Company, so you'll see that going forward, but we're Gerding Edlen today. This project is the PAE living building, and that's located in First and Pine in southwest downtown Portland. It's currently under construction, and we started construction right around the start of COVID and the impact here. And we had two really large goals in this project. One was to meet the very ambitious living building certification, which I'll talk about later. There's some background noise. Sure. Okay.
Everybody could make sure you're on mute if you are not named Carly Harrison. That would be great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And the other one was to be an investor-driven model, one that doesn't rely on deep foundation support or deep subsidy, mostly so that we could finance it in a way that hopefully could be replicable and hopefully change the way buildings are built. So you can go to the next slide. To talk about more about the living building and what that means, it's the most aggressive green building certification that exists so far. You've probably heard of the Bullitt Center in Seattle, which is, I think, one of the first ones that was built some years ago. But there's not too many nationwide, and as Rafi mentioned, this will be the largest commercial living building in the country. The goal is to be as self-sufficient as a building and efficient as a flower. And some of the kind of performance metrics used are these 7 petals or performance categories that you see here. Examples without going into a lot of detail are, really good indoor air quality, access and inclusion. We're putting solar panels on an affordable housing project. Incorporating biophilia, reusing materials, and really not having any waste generated from the construction of the building. And then I'll get into more detail on net positive water and net positive energy, which I'll focus on in the next slides, which you can go to those. So for net zero or net positive energy, you need to produce more energy than your building requires to operate. And this obviously is done by both being really energy efficient and also using renewable energy. As you can see here, a typical building would use, a code building like this, I would use about 47.9 kBTUs of energy per year. But ours is about 1/3 of that. And that is achieved by a lot of different strategies, many and most of which are passive. So, really good insulation, good windows, We have radiant floor heating, actuated windows that open automatically at night to cool the building naturally instead of having mechanical cooling. Our elevator, for example, also uses energy recovery. So as the brakes work, that energy goes back in to the energy to be reused. So really a lot of small things and then some bigger things too. And then we have renewable energy in this building, 135 kilowatt PV array on the roof, and then putting the array on the affordable housing project in Portland to help meet the overall production goals to meet the energy demands of the 16.6 kBTUs per year, per square foot per year. Going to the next slide. This is a pretty complicated slide, but basically for our net positive water goals, this is essentially showing that the building is a water and sewage treatment plant for all of its water and waste. Obviously, you have overflow that goes into the system. You have to be hooked up to water in case there's any kind of emergency, and also just for fire safety. But the water is a closed system where you collect rainwater on the roof and you treat it and reuse it for all of your potable needs, all of your gray water needs. And then we even are converting the waste from the urinals and composting toilets to collect in a nutrient recovery tank to be used as fertilizer. And then the composting toilets will be used as compost after that goes through the natural processes. This adds a little bit to the usable square footage challenges of a building because it takes a lot of space to store all of these items. And this is kind of a schematic showing you where they all are, most of which are on the ground floor. But really interesting, really challenging to do, but really, really great and a key part of this, this overall living building. You can go to the next slide. So obviously with a building like this, trying to achieve what it's trying to do, there's some costs associated with it. And that translates into, well, then how do we pay for the costs? Some of those bigger costs are the plumbing ones I mentioned for this closed system. The electrical, it can cost quite a bit to add solar and also to include the battery and storage for that battery going forward. So that has a cost premium. Our HVAC, nothing was super fancy. We have the radiant floor heating and cooling, elevator, as I mentioned, but a lot of other passive strategies. But there's a cost premium there. As you're probably thinking, most of these have some really good benefits to the operating expenses going forward. So just want to footnote that these have directly translate into some savings on energy and water. And then design and engineering. This took a lot of the best of the best minds out there to really put together a lot of extra energy modeling, a lot of coordination, a lot of figuring this out. As there's not too many projects out there. Fortunately, this building will be, the anchor tenant is PAE Engineers, who also did the Bullet Center and has just been an outstanding partner and a financial partner in this building. So we really had some great minds working on it. And then in order to meet the Living Building Challenge goals, we did have to include more in the core and shell than is typical. So there's about $15 worth of tenant improvement allowance that would typically be set aside or paid for by the tenant or in an allowance. So just increases the overall initial cost. You can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, some of the challenges are the cost premiums. Typically, with more or less costly space for tenants, you would reflect that in rent. However, you can't have rent too high, both to attract tenants that will pay it, but also to finance the project, even when considering the future operating expense savings. So we were, we needed to be limited there. And so it really came down to, well, what are the other opportunities to pay for a building like this, especially given our goals to have it be investor driven? The biggest thing was that a lot of the team were the project partners. So we had PAE Engineers, they were project partners, and they engineered this whole thing. ZGF Architects, Downtown Development Group contributing the land, Apex doing the leasing, and ourselves. And that both the biggest key with that is that it minimized the upfront out-of-pocket cost to get through feasibility, design, and then entitlement, which also really minimized the risk because a project like this hasn't been done before here. So it was majorly key. The other benefit to that is because those fees to get all that work done were contributed as equity, it minimized the amount of equity we needed to additionally raise. So that helped, especially with a project that, you know, the returns that we were targeting were a little bit lower for a building like this. It's a 10-year hold. We're targeting about 8 to 10% IRR. But the benefits that can help to offset that is that it's in an opportunity zone. So that provides a better IRR to investors after tax. We also, you know, assumed some grants, but a very small amount of grants relative to the capital stack. And the other benefit was it was 80% pre-leased by PAE engineers, which was key, as First Interstate Bank would say as well.
Carly, just a quick time check. You've got about a minute left, so we have a little bit of time for questions.
Perfect. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So the goal was to always keep our capital stack with really low leverage. And as you can see, we have a 54% loan to cost here. We were actually oversubscribed on the 44% of equity. But last minute, prior to closing, we had an investor back out. And so PACE just came in at the right time. It was a perfect fit. And so they are that 6% right there. You can go to the next slide. I'll finish it up. This was a great fit because what they pay for is what we are doing in abundance. They did have a lower cost of capital than the equity that they replaced. Not largely different, so it was only slightly beneficial to our returns, but as everyone has mentioned, there's a lot of benefits to a PACE loan, non-recourse, everything that's been mentioned. And it was really efficient to close. Working with Rafi and First Interstate, it just worked really, really well, and the draw process has been seamless thereafter. So we're really glad they could do it.
Perfect, thank you. And we may run just a couple minutes over the hour. Any panelists who need to hop off, feel free to do so. But we're gonna get through a couple of questions here. Quick note before we do the final questions. If you wanna find out more about Propertyfit, there are great resources on our website, which you can find here. We have a program guide, we have a marketing one-pager, we have all of the case studies you heard about today, plus a few additional case studies. We've got a capital source comparison calculator, so you can actually build your own capital stack and see how PACE would slot into it. So I highly suggest you check out the website, but most importantly, if you have a project in mind or any questions about anything today, feel free to get in touch with us. We'll get back to you quickly. You can just email us there at support@propertyfitoregon.com and we will be in touch. And there's a form you can fill out on the website as well if you'd like to get in touch that way. So getting into the Q&A, I saw one question about eligibility of nonprofits. So it's kind of a common misconception that nonprofits don't pay property taxes, therefore are not eligible for PACE. That is actually not true in Portland. Shelly, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about nonprofit eligibility, and maybe Rafi, if you could cover that topic on a national basis. I'd be curious to hear both.
Take my mute off. Nonprofits are eligible. The Propertyfit financing is secured by what we call a benefit assessment lien. And so that assessment lien is a voluntary lien that the nonprofit, just like any other property owner, would agree to have recorded against the property to secure the financing. And so yes, nonprofits are fully eligible. They would have to go through an appropriate level of underwriting, just like any capital provider would underwrite the deal. But if it works, the sheer nature of it being a nonprofit is not does not preclude them from participating in the program.
I would say nationwide, what Shelly said is spot on, accurate across the country. And we finance churches and houses of worship, YMCA's. That's all fair game for PACE.
Very good. And then I saw, let's see. I saw one question here asking us to send the deck, which we will do. So I see you there, Ray. We'll send that to you. And then I saw a question here wondering what the actual breakdown of the partnership is percentage-wise. I'm a little bit unclear what you mean by that question. I think that was from Bobby. So if you want to clarify that, we can maybe give you a better answer. But Shelly, maybe you want to talk a little bit about kind of the history of the Propertyfit program and the partnership between the county, Prosper Portland, and ETO that it represents.
Okay, yeah, so the partnership between the county, ETO, and Prosper Portland began when we first started thinking about designing the program. The statute allows a local jurisdiction to create a program, and that's why the county was so instrumental in the process. So they exercise their authority to create a program. They've contracted with Prosper Portland to administer the program on their behalf. And Energy Trust of Oregon is part of this partnership because early on we saw, one of our design principles was to leverage existing capacity and not to duplicate it. And so we saw Energy Trust of Oregon as a critical partner because of the energy efficiency infrastructure that the organization has in place. And so that's how the partnership, the Propertyfit partnership, came together.
Okay, very good. Well, that's all the questions I see. That there's a couple additional ones here that are probably better addressed offline, so we'll send emails to those folks that are more specific or technical questions. But I think we can wrap it up there. So thanks everybody, and really appreciate our time from all the panelists. Feel free to reach out to them directly if you have questions, or shoot us an email at support@propertyfitoregon.com. We can connect you with any of the panelists that way if you prefer, and always happy to talk about your projects as well. So thanks everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.